particular error out here telling that this operation is not authorized to perform. As simple as it gets out. So yes, I have this battle partially won, but also let me take one more question out here telling, is public IP unique for each device? Definitely yes. Your public IP and my public IP cannot be the same. Your public IP and my public IP is completely different. So is this okay to go ahead add the IPs out here and allow only the users from that particular IP out here?
Uh, Current one, I'm asking like, are we giving IP address or like IP range?
I'm not talking about the range yet. I'm just talking about
Mhm.
the address. We'll talk about the range, what range is and all these things out. I'm talking about the address and not the range out there. Are we good with this? With let's say enhancing our security by adding let's say an IP. I can go ahead add multiple IPs out here. You can also use a PowerShell to go ahead and add these IPs out there. What if a
Also,
team
one
has
more
200
doubt.
users? Just yes, go ahead please.
I mean, right now, from like it is work from home. It's not like we don't know. I mean, is it a VPN based? Like, because if it is VPN based, we know the range or like addresses which we get. If it is work
Mhm,
from home, all over India,
mhm.
people are there, different
Correct.
different IPs. How can we gather that?
How can we gather that? Yes, good question. That will be a challenge. Now, this is not a VPN based, meaning I'll talk about what VPN really is about. This model is not a VPN based, so it'll become very difficult for me if I have a number of users across the country who are working, let's say, and it'll be very difficult to gather those IPs. But
Yes.
let's say hook or crook, you gathered all those IPs. You gathered
Yeah.
all those IPs, you got a bunch of IPs, you whitelisted all of them, everyone is working fine. Let's say I am one of those developers, one of those 100 developers. Again, the limit here is let's say 100. So if let's say any number goes above 100, I won't be able to add your IP out there. Very simple. Let's
Okay.
say by hook or crook, let's imagine a few scenarios out here, hypothetical conditions that there are only 100 developers in your team. You gathered all these IPs, you took like about a week, gathered all their IPs, you sent across emails telling that please give your IPs to me. They all gave their IPs. You took a PowerShell script, put this in, and all that stuff. Great. Now, let's say I am one of those 100 developers. Now, what
No.
happened is that I had a mood to go ahead to a mountain and kind of work out there. Okay, I'm doing let's say traveling and I'm working. So as and
Okay.
when you added this IP, I said, okay, fine, great, I'm working today. Now it's a Saturday. I still have work on a Saturday, but I'm going to a hill station and working. Okay, I go to a hill station, meaning I am changing my network. I'm changing the internet that I'm connected to. I'm not sitting in this particular office. I'm going to, let's say, a different internet, let's say, a provider. I
Yeah.
connected to a different internet, or I'm using my mobile hotspot, whatever it is. The IP range that I get will automatically change. The IP range that you're working out of will automatically change. Reason being, all these IPs are called dynamic IP allocations,
Yeah.
meaning
I mean,
even exactly these are all dynamic IPs, meaning
normally,
hmm,
normally household people don't get static IP.
household people are not allocated static IPs out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Normally, even if you yes, households, whichever let's say household or small businesses, you are not allocated a static IP, which means that even if you have a power cut in your house, the power comes back, the IP will change. This IP is not the same. This is a dynamic IP allocation completely decided by your internet service provider out there. Now imagine the same thing. I cannot say you cannot have a power cut because this is something that I cannot control on. Neither I can say that what, you cannot go somewhere and work. No, this is work from home. You can go anywhere and work, not a problem. Also, if you restart your laptop, also the IP changes. I cannot even tell you that what, you cannot restart your laptop and all that stuff. Becomes very difficult if I have such a kind of a model out here. This is not pure, let's say this is not a foolproof mechanism, because as and when you go somewhere your IP changes, I'll again have to let's say gather all the IPs, again have to whitelist, which will become a very manual process to go ahead and do. And at some point I'll be vexed up of this, telling that what, how many IPs should I kind of go ahead and say monitor and so on and so forth. That's the reason Microsoft says that what, if you have such a kind of a solution or if you have such a kind of a thing out there, why don't you go ahead create your own network? or create your own set of IP addresses. Now, whatever IPs that you're looking at are provided by the internet, are provided by, let's say, your internet service provider, ISP. Now, Azure is now telling me that, you know what? Yes, you will run into issues when you are relying upon someone else. But what if you can create your own network and give yourself your own addresses? Meaning, this is one address that you're seeing. What if, what if you can create your own range of addresses? That's what someone was asking is, can I create address range? Meaning, can I have an address starting with 49.37.128.0 to, let's say, dot 100, dot 200, so many addresses out there? Can you create your own ranges out here? And if you are creating your own ranges, these are called as private address ranges. And all the private address ranges together will give you something called as a private network. And since you are not going ahead and buying a cable from a shop and creating a network out here, you're just creating a network on Azure, which is virtual in nature. That's the reason we call this as a virtual network. And that brings me to a very important concept called virtual networks out here. The term virtual indicates that it is not physical, meaning you cannot see cables and all. It's a piece of software that you're creating on the Azure cloud, which will help you give something called as a private address range. And using this particular private address range, you can secure resources like storage accounts, virtual machines, app services, whatever that you can think of can be secured using this particular virtual address ranges out here. And that is what I am getting into on how to create it, how to integrate it, and how to maintain the security. And if you have this, then what kind of, let's say, issues that you can come across and all these things out here. Is there any questions with this still here with the theory of it?
When you are connected to the internet, the ID will be changed or not?
When you say ID changes, when you say this one, you mean this ID?
No, 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 no. The network ID. What do you say? IP address, I think.
Yes, it will change because this is
Not this
something
one.
that
Not
I
this
do
one.
not have control.
Not this one.
Okay.
As you said, you can create in our own house. So I will arrange it to
Uh,
the users.
mhm.
That's why I'm asking.
No, again, I'm not telling that you create it in your own house. I'm telling that you will create this in the Azure portal. You will create it inside something known as your Azure subscription. And if you are creating this out, this will be a static private address range. Static, meaning this won't change. Even if you have a power cut, whatever it is, you are buying
Yes.
these addresses on Azure. So that won't change out there.
So that only one IP address I can give a n number of persons.
I will talk about how people can access it. I talk about how developers can access your accounts and all these things securely. First, let's secure it. Let's understand this concept, and then we can go about, let's say, telling that how can a user, as me, how can I access it within this particular network. Yes, any more questions that I can take? All right, so let's go ahead and create something called as a virtual network in Azure, because this is now a need for me, which will give me some addresses that I can use so that I can secure my accounts out here and etc. Now, very importantly, my resource is in a location called East US2. My virtual network should also be in the same location. I cannot take a virtual network that is sitting in Central Europe. Now, this is the symbol or this is the diagram of a virtual network in Azure. I cannot take a virtual network that is there in Central US and I cannot attach it to a storage account. This is not possible. All these are now regional concepts. These are regional in nature. So, if my resources like storage accounts are in ECS2, my virtual network can only be created in ECS2 only. So let's do that. So in order to create in order to create a virtual network again, I will type in virtual networks. I have something called virtual networks out here. I will say create this out, and it now asks me for a couple of details out here, like what is the resource group. The resource group can be anything, not a problem. You do not have to, let's say, create it in the same resource group. Resource group can be anything. Region has to be the same. So I'll say just take this resource group since I already have it. I'll say this is a demo VNet, and I'll say this is East US 2, and I'll say next. It's now asking me, since you're creating something called as a virtual network out here, can you tell me what is your address range? Meaning, how many addresses you want to get out of this particular virtual network, how big or how small of a virtual network that you need. So now it's telling this is nothing but, just imagine that this is your resource. You are drawing a fence or a boundary around this resource so that you can secure it. Now Microsoft is asking me how big of a boundary wall that you need or how small of a boundary wall that you need out there, and this is declared in the form of something called as address range. And if you look at this, there is something called as 10.0.0.0 forward slash 16. This is how an address range actually looks like, which is 10.0.0.0 forward slash 16 out here. This is called as an address range, or you can also call this as a CIDR address block. CIDR here stands for classless interdomain routing. Classless interdomain routing out here. What does this really tell you? Is that very simple. In this 10.0.0.0 forward slash 16, I can get around 65,536 IP addresses. Now, if you look at this one, this is one IP address. This is a range of IP addresses. When you see something like forward slash and all that stuff, it's a range of IP addresses out here. And do you see here? What is it telling you in the bracket? 65,536 addresses. But how does Microsoft even calculate this out? Now, before I go there, what you need to understand is that this number 10.0.0.0 is for you and me to understand. You and me can understand this number, so we are able to type this out, write this out, and all these things out. But for a backend server like Azure, now Azure is nothing but a big computer running from somewhere. Azure has to convert these numbers into a language exactly called binaries, zeros and ones. That's the language what a computer can understand. So if I just go here into Google, I don't want to, let's say, again write down all the maths out there. If I say IP to binary converter, I get, let's say, multiple online tools out here. I'll just put this IP address here, and you see I get, let's say, binary numbers, zeros and ones. So it looks something like this. The 10.0.0.0, what you see out here, is ideally looking like this 10.0.0.0 is getting converted into 0.0.0.0.1.0.1.0 dot 0.0.0.0 dot 0.0.0 dot 0.0.0.0.0.0. Each and every block that you see, so this block called 0.0.0.0.1.0.1.0 is 10 out here for you. This is the 0 out here for you. This is another 0. This is another 0. So it is converted into a binary digit, and how many digits that you see here? 8 here, 8, 8, 8 and 8. Since you have 8 separated by a dot, this is called as an octet. OCTECT. Octa, 8, octet. You have octa-core processors and all that stuff, 8 core. This is 8 out here. And since you have 4 such 8s, it is 8 into 4, 32 bits of information. Meaning you can carry 32 bits of information using these IP addresses. Meaning any communication between one device to the other device happens over the IP address, and the IP can carry that particular information. And what I'm now telling Microsoft is this. I'm telling it is 10.0.0.0 /16. When I put a /16, this number is called as a subnet masking. And it tells that, okay, fine. If you declare a subnet masking called 16, 16 is very simply 8 plus 8, right? And it always calculated from the left hand side to the right hand side, from this direction to this direction. So if you look at this, 8 plus 8 is nothing but these two digits, 10.0. So what Microsoft is now telling is that these two numbers will always and always be constant. You cannot use them. You can only use these two digits out here. When I say use these two digits, I'll talk about what I'm talking there. And this is what happens. In order to do the calculation of the number of IPs that you get, Microsoft will simply run a formula in the background telling 2 to the power 32, which is the total number of bits, minus what is the reservation? 16, which is 2 power 16, which is 65,536. Again, do I have to do all these calculations? Don't even worry about all these calculations. You just need to understand what the logic about that is. But there's an excellent website called CIDR.xyz. It will tell you, give me the IP or give me the address range. I'll calculate and tell you how many addresses you get. For example, in our case, I have 10.0.0.0 / what? 16. Do you see what is the count here? And now it is telling everything that is color coded is static. Everything that is not color coded can be changed. Meaning the addresses that you get here is something like this. It is 10.0, which is constant. This constant will not change, cannot change. The first IP address can be 0.0, first IP address. Second can be 10.0, always constant, .0.1. Third can be 10.0.0.2. Fourth can be 10.0.0.0.3, so on and so forth. Meaning each and every IP address can be attached to one particular storage account and secure it out. Meaning you can have 65,536 storages secured in this particular network. That how big this is. That how big the network that you get out here with a /16. And the last IP address that you get here is 10.0.0.255. This is the last number that you get according to the rule. Now you can also have one more combination, which is 10.0.1.0. You can do this. You can also say 10.0.2.0, so on and so forth to what? 10.0.255.0. You can also have one more combination, which is 10.0.1.1, 10.0.1.2, 1.3, so on and so forth. Meaning in this combination, in this particular, let's say, combination, you can have a probability of 256 into 256. The reason that I'm telling is if you calculate from 0 to 255, you get what? 256 addresses, and if you combine, you do all these calculations, you can do a 256 into 256 possible ways, which will again give you 65,536 addresses out here. This is how big of an IP that you get. And finally, once you decide what is your IP address range, you can say next security, review and create this out. This is how you create a very simple virtual network out here. And how do you attach this virtual network? What do you get with that and all that stuff? That's something that we'll talk about. I'll say create this out. And once hit this particular create button, it will go ahead and create me a virtual network of, let's say, 65,536 address range out there. Yes, any questions that I can take? Anyone, any questions that I can take till you?
Sir, in this 65,000 IP address, what
Mhm.
type of IP address I can allocate to admin, or who is allocated to me? And for example, I am using one IP address and same IP
Mhm.
address using you also. How it will
No,
be?
you when you say you are using this IP, when you say I am using this IP, you cannot use it. Very simple. You cannot take this IP, give it to a user. No, you cannot do that. You're taking this IP, giving it to a storage account. How do you use a storage account? How do you get inside a storage account? That's a question that I'll answer. That's a question that I need to address. But these IPs are not for you or not for me. These IPs are for the services that we create on the Azure portal. These IP addresses that you get out of this particular, let's say, virtual network are for the services and not for the user. Getting the point?
Yes, yes, yes. That means each service we have a different IP address.
Yes. Each service can have a different IP address that is coming out of this particular range. And you can allocate that particular IP to that particular service out there.
We have multiple VNs
Just a
for
second.
one subscription.
Just a second, Praveen. I'll just come back to you. Yes. Go ahead, please. We as a DevOps, we need to create the virtual networks for the client, and you cannot create an IP address for someone until and unless you go ahead and do something called as a VPN and all that stuff, which we'll talk about. But this is something that I'm not going ahead and giving it to a developer. Now, what I'll be doing further is that very simple. There is something called as a virtual machine in place. There is something known as a machine, and this machine can be created inside this particular network. I can, as a developer, as a DevOps engineer, give you my developer and access a secure access on this machine. If you get inside this machine, you'll have a Google Chrome browser and all that stuff. Using that, you can communicate with my storage account. This is the okay. Using that, you can communicate with my storage account out there. So it is through that direction that you go as a developer or as a DevOps engineer out there. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that particular enhancement. This class is more for just the introduction of what virtual networks really are. But I need to, let's say, go inside the concept. I need to tell how can we go ahead do a secure access out there and all these things. Yes, any more questions here? Is networking concept comes under administration part? Yes, it is a pure administration concept out here. But as a tester, as a developer, as a DevOps engineer, whichever role that you are, if you're using cloud, you need to know networking. It's as simple as that. Because networking is the backbone of any cloud provider. If you understand networking, you understand 50% of the cloud problems. Yes, any more questions here? Go please. Yes, yes. Static. It is static nature. Correct. Again, I'm not directly let's say giving all the 15,500 members to this particular storage account. I'm not directly adding them. I rather give the access to the virtual machine that has access to the storage account. We'll see that on how do you go ahead secure the access to your account. How do you secure this and all these things? Because this lecture needs two different parts out here. I need to, let's say, span it over one class and span it over the other class out there. So we'll talk about those concepts and how do you, let's say, get the access to that particular storage account. So the intention here is to just understand what do you mean by a virtual network? How do you create a virtual network out there? Once we get this out, then we can, let's say, go ahead into the further concepts out there. Yes, any more questions here?
Kiran, slash 16 is also static one, or
The slash 16 just tells you what are the number of octets that you're using and what are the number of octets that you are, let's say, reserving out there. So this now is a static. Now this is now a static address space.
okay.
Hi, Kiran.
Go ahead, please.
Is there any types of giving the IP address range? Actually, we don't want to give that much of IPs.
Yes, you
65,000,
can.
right?
Yes, you can limit the number of IPs. We'll also talk about how to limit the number of IPs out there.
Okay.
Yes, class A, class B, and class C comes into picture. We'll talk about what is class A contiguous IP, class B IPs, class C IPs, and all these things out. All right, so I am end of the hour right now. So please, all I would suggest is just go ahead understand how to create the IP addressing out there. We'll see how to connect your storage accounts, how to secure your storage accounts, and a lot of concepts that are to follow. All right, thank you guys, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.